Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final session of Kidney Action Week 4 today. We have our final session for today, as I mentioned, Ask a Nephrologist with the Cooking Doc, Dr. Blake Shusterman. Hello, my name is Melanie Paris, and I'm Senior Director of Health Initiatives and Education here at American Kidney Fund, and I have the honor of acting as your moderator during this interactive session where you get to ask questions all about eating with kidney disease to a nephrologist who cooks. And that is Dr. Blake Shusterman, known as the Cooking Doc. Here at AKF, we have found these Ask the Nephrologist segments among our most popular. And so we think we will be able to provide for you all the great insights and information about food and kidney disease, eating with kidney disease. And so we're just really happy to have Dr. Blake Shusterman, the Cooking Doc, with us today. So Dr. Shusterman is a board certified nephrologist and a partner at Carolina Nephrology. He received his medical degree from The Ohio State University, my alma mater, go Bucks, and he completed his internal medicine residency and nephrology fellowship at University of Virginia. He is the creator and host of the Cooking Doc, the author of the book, Cooking Doc's Kidney Healthy Cooking, Modern 10-Day Step Guide to Preventing and Managing Kidney Disease. He serves as medical director at multiple dialysis units and provides in-center dialysis, home hemodialysis, and peritoneal dialysis in acute and in hospital settings. He is a clinical assistant professor at the USC School of Medicine in Greenville, South Carolina, and oversees the medical student nephrology rotations. He is also an ambassador of American Kidney Fund's Kidney Kitchen, where he's made some great videos for us. And he is passionate about home dialysis, patient education, and the importance of diet in the management of chronic kidney disease. And this session is all about getting answers to your questions, so feel free to type your questions and comments into the window next to or below the Facebook Live video stream, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. We already have them coming in. So I know we have a full house with lots of great discussions coming up, so let's kick it off. Dr. Shusterman, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
So before we get started, what I wanted to do was just give a quick overview of just eating with kidney disease and kind of why it's a struggle. So when you eat and drink with kidney disease, it really plays a big role in your health, and adjusting to the renal dietary guidelines poses one of the most significant challenges for people who are living with kidney disease. And understanding and following a kidney-friendly food and fluid plan every day often can feel like a full-time job, but there are many things to consider, like your nutrients, the amount of fluid that you have to take in and consume, and what to eat depending on the stage of kidney disease that you have. Many people with kidney disease often have other conditions such as diabetes and high blood pressure, so paying attention to food is very, very important. So knowing how to manage your sodium, potassium, phosphorus, protein, and other nutrients can help you bring the joy back into eating and living with kidney disease. So, Dr. Shusterman, I have a question for you. So you're a nephrologist and you wrote your book, The Cooking Doc's Kidney Healthy Cooking, Modern 10-Step Guide to Preventing and Managing Kidney Disease. And you've created videos, you have your own website where you're showing people how to cook. So tell us, as a nephrologist, how did you become so interested in food and its impact on kidney disease that you became the Cooking Doc?
Sure. Well, it all starts with a love of cooking and a love of eating. So all my life, I've loved to cook and to eat, and a lot of my activities are revolved around that. So naturally, when I started my practice as a kidney doctor, I gravitated towards those parts of kidney disease. And from day one, when I started as a nephrologist down here in Greenville, South Carolina, and I saw the vending machines in the dialysis unit full of unhealthy options for eating, it became clear to me basically three things. One is that a lot of people really weren't taught and didn't know how diet can impact their kidney health. There's also a lack of information from medical staff, from nurses and techs and medical assistants about how food can impact kidney health in the same way. And a lot of them were recommending things like an all bland or all white diet, white bread, white rice, things that I knew in general weren't really healthy. And the third thing really that drove me towards this field was that people didn't know how to make food that was good for their kidney health taste good. And that's really the key, because if the food doesn't taste good, it doesn't matter what your doctor, what anybody tells you to eat, you're not going to follow through with that. It's much easier if the food tastes good. So when I saw those three things together, plus my love of cooking and eating, that's how I became the cooking doc.
Well, you're so right that if food doesn't taste good, people just don't want to eat it if it's quote unquote good for you. So glad that you've bridged this, eating with kidney disease and making food taste good. So just to give more context to the overview that I gave, can you tell us, why is eating and paying attention to those key nutrients I mentioned in the overview so important when you're living with kidney disease?
Sure. So the kidneys are involved in the management and the processing of a lot of the things that you eat through your diet, from potassium to phosphorus, sodium, protein. All of these different nutrients that are in food are processed by the kidneys. And if you have kidney disease, it may impact the way your body processes these nutrients. But nobody really thinks about eating in general as it comes to potassium, phosphorus, and sodium if they don't have any health problems. So if you develop kidney disease, it can really seem overwhelming to try to eat specifically to these nutrients. But if we boil it down in a more simplistic and sometimes kind of an intuitive way, it can be much easier to cook and eat without having to rack your brain about how to manage every specific nutrient. The nutrients are very important in general, but there are patterns of eating that you can learn that can really make it so you don't have to analyze every single thing that goes into your food.
So when you're working with people who have kidney disease, and I would imagine you have interaction with caregivers who are also oftentimes the ones providing meals and cooking meals, what do you think people struggle with most when they are adjusting to cooking and eating when they have kidney disease?
Well, the first thing is that the flavors are definitely going to change, especially if you've grown up. I'm in the South, Greenville, South Carolina. And when I started 12 years ago, I noticed that a lot of my people that I saw with kidney disease were eating a lot of fried foods and salty foods and thick sauces. And, it's because that's the way that, their mother made them. That's the way they've always eaten. That's the way they've grown up. And so if your caregiver says, and your doctor says, all of a sudden you have to change everything about what you're eating, it's very, very difficult. You're used to eating a certain way. Your family's used to cooking a certain way. And so it can be difficult to make that change right off the bat. Plus, with all those nutrients that we were just talking about previously, it can be overwhelming when you try to figure out what exactly to put in each dish. But by working with a dietitian and by working to kind of slowly change your taste buds, a lot of those things can be overcome.
And you can adjust your palate, as you mentioned, over time.
Yep.
So if you think about the misconceptions that you often hear, what are some of those bigger misconceptions that you think people have about cooking and eating with kidney disease?
Well, there are two big things. The first is that one kidney diet is suitable for everybody with kidney disease. And that is the biggest thing that I hear and that I see and that confuses people, because somebody who has stage 2 or 3 kidney disease, somebody who has stage 5 kidney disease, somebody who's on dialysis, somebody who has a kidney transplant, all of those people may need different kidney diets. So when people look on the internet, they look for a kidney diet and kind of just get lumped automatically sometimes into the most restrictive kidney diets, which does not apply to a lot of people who have kidney disease. So that's the first misconception that I see. The second big misconception is that you can't enjoy some of your favorite foods. It's September, we're just getting through summer tomato harvest time. And that's always a big one for people when they feel that they have to give up all their summer tomatoes, for example, because they want to eat a lower potassium diet. But there are ways to incorporate almost every food into a safe diet for people with kidney disease. Now, you may not be able to eat all of the tomatoes off your tomato plant, but a slice or two here and there, or a little small tomato salad can usually be incorporated into your diet. So understanding that there is not we're not going to tell you to avoid all of your favorite foods if you have kidney disease. You can usually, if you're careful and working with a dietitian or your doctor, work in most foods, at least a little bit of them, to your diet.
Thank you for that. And I also want to say that in your book, on your website, and also with the videos that you've made for us on Kidney Kitchen, and also the recipes that we have on Kidney Kitchen at kidneyfund.org, all of the recipes are meant to taste good, not just to have certain nutrients and dietary guidelines that a lot of people feel very restrictive. Your book, your site, it's meant to help people put the joy back into eating. And so I really encourage everybody to take a look at all of those things. So we have a lot of questions coming in here. So you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. Okay, here we go. All right. So this comes from Mary. Mary asks, any tips for making food taste better without salt? So, you know, with kidney disease, you have to really limit your sodium intake. My family tends to keep 2 salt shakers on the table at all times.
That's a great question, Mary, and one that I hear all the time from my patients, and often one of the hardest things to do, because everybody knows that when you put a little bit of salt on something, it actually has a effect on the taste buds in your mouth. It can hide some of the bitter flavors and make the food taste better in general. So getting away from that salt is really difficult. The things that I focus on when limiting the salt are citrus, so lemon zest, lime, orange. Those kind of citrus flavors can have a similar effect where they kind of brighten the flavor of a food. If, for example, you have vegetables that you're oven roasted vegetables and you want to put a little sprinkle of salt on them, but instead you have a squeeze of lemon, it will give you that same bright flavor. The same thing will happen with vinegars. So balsamic vinegar, red wine vinegar, cider vinegar, rice wine vinegar. My cabinet is full of a whole bunch of vinegars. I probably have 10 of them. And they're not very expensive, but they can give you that same bright flavor with food. So I kind of steer that way initially. And then you can look into non-sodium seasonings. There's a whole host of no salt seasonings from Mrs. Dash that can give you that same kind of flavor without the salt. The one thing that I will tell you for you and your family also is that over time, if you start using less and less salt, your taste buds will actually change. And so you'll be able to appreciate the flavors in something that has lower salt after a couple of weeks of doing it than you would have at the beginning when you were used to really heavily salted food. I sometimes have people come back and see me in the office a couple months after they've been eating a low sodium diet. And they say, well, I went to a barbecue and I tasted all the food and it all just tasted like the ocean. It was so salty because they had changed their palate to really appreciate a lower salt, a lower sodium flavor. So one of the toughest things there is out there is doing that, but it can be done. Just be patient.
Just a follow up to that, because I've talked to people who've experienced the same thing, and you talk about adjusting your palate, and after a while, some foods just taste way too salty to you. About how long does it take for someone's palate to be adjusted to lower sodium? What should someone expect in terms of that timeline until they get used to it?
Well, I think first of all, the longer it goes on, the more used to it you will get. And I'm trying to remember the timeline in a study where they had people who were really used to heavily salted food, and then they gave them a bowl of soup, and over a course of, I think it was 2 to 4 weeks, they lowered the amount of sodium in the soup each day, and then gave them a bowl of soup to season on their own, and they ended up putting much less salt in there. So I think within 2 to 4 weeks, you can start to see some changes.
Okay, so Mary, Cooking Doc says take those 2 salt shakers off your table and put some vinegar or something else instead of salt shakers. Okay, next question. Does smoked meat do more to harm the kidneys than deep fried or pan fried? How about roasted or braised?
So I think the jury is still out. I think that's a question we don't have the full answer to about smoked meats and their effect on the kidneys. There are some studies showing that some meats cooked at really high temperatures can increase risk for cancers. But we don't have a lot of data on smoked meats and as they relate to kidney health. The most important thing, as far as meat goes and kidney health, is to have smaller portions of meat. So there's a lot of studies coming out that showing that smaller portions of animal protein may help protect your kidneys in the long run. And then figuring out the best way to cook the meats. So staying away from frying meats if possible, because that will give you extra fat, and using methods like baking or even sauteing with just a little bit of oil instead.
Okay, so I have two questions related to what you were just talking about. This comes from Keith, and he asks, what are some meats that will not make our kidneys work as hard?
So, Keith, I love the way that you phrase that. But by work is hard, because one of the things that is important in developing a diet that will benefit your kidneys is trying to get those kidneys to work less hard to process the food that you eat, both to keep those the blood pressure stable and also to manage the acid load that comes into your body when you eat. So if you could keep those kidneys from working as hard, and this is a very simplistic way of looking at it, but you may be able to decrease the scarring in the kidneys over time. So when I think about meats, I think about smaller portions of meat, and then I tend to think of white meats like chicken instead of red meats like beef and pork. There was a study that came out of China a few years back that demonstrated that people who have a diet that is much higher in red meat animal protein had a higher risk of development of end-stage kidney disease requiring dialysis over the course of many years. So trying to have a diet that's focused more around, poultry, chicken, or turkey, or even seafood, I think is the way to go. And then if you can incorporate non-meat proteins in there as well, beans and tofu, you'll do well to help protect your kidneys in the long run.
Well, Dr. Shusterman, that really leads into another question that we have here, and that we get a lot at American Kidney Fund about eating. What are your thoughts on the vegan diet?
I think the vegan diet is a great diet that has a lot of potential benefits for your kidneys. So when I think of a vegan diet, I think of a plant-based diet as well, something that's focused on fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains, beans. So a diet that's vegan isn't necessarily healthy, because you can also be a vegan and eat the Impossible Burger with fries when you go to Burger King. So a vegan diet, I think if it's plant-based, you may lower your risk of kidney disease in the long run. That's what we're studying. That's what a lot of people are studying right now. But a plant-based diet may improve your gut microbiome. It may help you improve your blood pressure. It may decrease your kidney acid load. It decreases your kidney's need to process that animal protein. So a diet that is plant-based or vegan, I think, has potential for being helpful for people with kidney disease. Now, that being said, it is difficult for a lot of people to go from being a carnivore to vegan. And not only because of their taste buds, but because sometimes it's more difficult to develop flavors and to cook a vegan diet. It takes a little more thought process, especially if you're not used to it. You have to cut up the veggies. You have to develop flavor over time. And so it can be tough to just kind of snap your fingers and be vegan. But incorporating things like meatless Mondays or meatless meals throughout the week is a great place to start. And then you could see how things go over time. Maybe that will lead you to a full-on plant-based diet, or maybe you'll just be doing it a couple times a week. But I think either way is a good way to cut out your animal protein and really help you focus on the nutrients and the fresh foods that you could be eating that can benefit your kidney health.
So with eating vegan or just cutting out a lot of the protein, are there any stages in kidney disease where those have more implications than others? Because I'm looking at a question that just came in. It said, I have 3B kidney disease, so stage 3B. I know I need to limit my intake of protein, but is red meat okay in moderation?
So the real kicker here is what your definition of moderation is. For me, somebody who loves to eat potato chips, my definition of moderation of potato chips is probably not going to get me any health benefits, because my definition of moderation is a lot different than somebody else's definition of moderation. So I think that a little bit of red meat can certainly be incorporated into a healthy diet. The white meats are probably healthier. But if you want to incorporate a little bit of red meat into your diet, I think it can be done safely. The things that I would think about would just be trying to make it so that it happens once every couple weeks or once a month. And if you are doing it more often, then making sure that those red meat portions are small. So 3 ounces maybe at a time would be a good place to start. And if you're coming from a place where you eat red meat 5 to 7 days a week, then cutting down to a couple days a week is already a great improvement in your health. So, look at where you're starting from and where you're going, and even incremental changes like that can make a big difference.
Very true. And it's hard to change overnight. And so giving yourself some space to make those gradual changes seems like it makes sense. So I have, go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing, so those gradual changes I think are really important. It's important to note that. And, when you're trying to make these changes, it's not like you are the only thing in your life is trying to eat better to help your kidneys. Everybody's got all kinds of other stresses and things that they are dealing with throughout the day. So as a doctor and a health professional, I understand that this is not going to be may not be your only focus and the only thing that you need to work on. So we celebrate any kind of incremental changes. And for all of you just being here in general, participating in this chat is fantastic. It means you're looking to take control of your health and figure out ways to improve your kidney health.
For sure. We have just a variety of questions. So here's one from, let's see. These are just such great questions. So this comes from Alberto, and he asked, is spicy food good for your kidneys? I love habanero peppers, but my wife says they are bad for me since I have kidney problems. What do you say, Cooking Doc?
I say the spicier the better as far as I'm concerned. I don't see any problems with spicy peppers or spicy food as it relates to your kidney health. And I think spice is often a really good way to season foods and flavor it without adding a lot of extra salt. If you make it spicy enough, nobody's going to miss the heavy salt.
Okay, so it sounds like Cooking Doc Alberta, you get a thumbs up on the habanero peppers. Okay, so we have a couple questions about oils. Is it okay to cook with avocado and coconut oil? And another one, is avocado oil better than olive oil?
So there's not a lot of great scientific studies on which oils are better or worse for your kidney health. And really, if you get deep in the weeds about oils and what's good or bad for your health in general, it can get pretty confusing and pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. Because if you start looking online with things, there are a lot of claims being made about those specific oils, avocado oil, or coconut oil, olive oil. The most studied of the oils is definitely olive oil, studied through the Mediterranean diet. And it seems to be on the scale of healthy oils, it tends to be more healthy than the other ones. The way I look at oils, though, is I don't tend to cook with a lot of oil in general. We have a salad dressing with oil, or if you're sauteing some food with a little bit of oil. or if you're cooking or baking, I use a little bit of oil. And I tend to choose my oils because I don't use them that often. I choose them based on the flavor that I want and their cooking properties. So if I'm doing something on the grill or with high heat, I want to use something like grapeseed oil that has a very high smoke point. Or if I'm using a salad dressing, I'll use an olive oil, extra virgin olive oil that's a little more delicate. And then sometimes if I'm cooking or baking, I will use a little bit of coconut oil because I like a little bit of that flavor in there. Now, if you get to a point where you are using lots and lots of oil every day, you may be adding a little bit of too much fat to your diet in general. And so then you may really need to focus on, cutting back a little bit and using more olive oil than the other things. But I look at most oils as which oil is going to give me the right characteristics for the cooking method that I'm using. I tend to use mostly olive oil. And I think the jury's still out about how avocado oil or even coconut oil compares in the long run.
What do you think about cooking sprays, the nonstick cooking sprays? Are those part of oils, or are those okay?
I think those are fine. When you use a cooking spray, there's not much coming out. Basically, you're using just a little bit to keep the food from sticking. And it is a nice way to cut down on the amount of fat if you want to use a lower fat ingredient to prevent something from sticking. So I do use them occasionally.
So let's transition a little bit away from oils to sugar. So Jacob asks, does fake sugar cause the same damage as regular sugar? Is it actually worse since it's fake? So I'm assuming, Jacob, you mean Splenda or just sugar substitutes in general?
Great question, and a really complicated question about what is better and worse for your kidneys. The number one cause of kidney disease is diabetes. So for people with diabetes, the way to help manage it is by using less sugar and eating less carbohydrates. And so if you transition some of those sugar foods or those sugar sweeteners into the artificial sweeteners, then you will be able to certainly control your diabetes a little bit better. So if we're looking strictly on the diabetes control, I think the fake sugars probably give you a little bit of benefit. The same comes as far as weight gain goes, because those sugar substitutes will have less calories, although that's a little more controversial because it may change the way that your taste buds work and your brain works. The way that I look at those sugar substitutes and kind of the way I look at food in general is if we don't focus necessarily on what is worse than something else or what is bad, how can we change our taste buds so that maybe we are not looking for such a sweet flavor when we go for something desserty? So if you're using sugar substitutes, oftentimes people use them to sweeten a drink. So sweeten coffee or sweeten tea. And if you are able to, over time, change your taste buds so that you appreciate coffee with maybe just a little bit of something in it, or even black coffee, the same with tea, going with unsweet tea instead of sweetened tea, then it doesn't matter whether you're using a little bit of sugar or a little bit of sugar substitute, because you've changed your taste buds in a way so that you naturally want something that doesn't have a lot of either one of those in it. So that's the way that I approach these sugar substitutes. Now, some of the things that we've heard in the past is as far as maybe cancer links and things with sugar substitutes seem to be maybe overblown a little bit. So I think that sugar substitutes can be used a little bit to help mitigate sweet flavor, especially for people who have diabetes.
Very good points there. So, Dr. Shusterman, you just mentioned coffee. So, as you know, living with kidney disease is not just about what you eat, but it's also about what you drink and managing fluids. So we have a couple of questions related to that. We have a question asks, is coffee okay to drink? How many cups per day can I have?
So if you read my book, you will find that this is my favorite part of seeing people in my office with kidney disease, because we often have all these questions about things that they can't eat, and then we get to coffee. And it turns out that most of the studies that are coming out show that coffee is, at worst, not bad for people with chronic kidney disease, and at best, may give your kidneys a little bit of help over the long run. So coffee is a safe drink for people with kidney disease. Now, if you have things like atrial fibrillation, where you have a fast heart rate, then a few cups of coffee may put you a little higher risk for atrial fibrillation based because of the caffeine. But the studies show that most people with kidney disease can have 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day safely without it affecting things. Now, if you have advanced kidney disease, such as stage 4 or 5 kidney disease, sometimes you may be on a fluid restricted diet, meaning that you have to limit how much fluid that you drink in, because your kidneys aren't able to get rid of that fluid after you drink it. So for you, the biggest limitation on coffee is going to be staying under that fluid restriction limit, because the coffee will count, plus your water and juice and tea and everything. Now, the other thing I tell people about coffee is that oftentimes it's not the coffee that's unhealthy, but it's the Frappuccino with extra whip and whole milk that you get at Starbucks, because of the extra calories and fat that you get with that. So if you stick towards lightly sweetened or lightly flavored drinks, or even black coffee, if you're like me and love the taste of black coffee, you're better off. But in general, coffee is a safe drink for people with kidney disease.
Fantastic. So just stay away from all the added things when it kind of sometimes doesn't become coffee anymore after everything is added there. So another question about fluids is from Mimi, and she asks, is flavored seltzer water bad for you? I don't know if it's flavored seltzer water in terms of sugar flavored or artificial flavor. Is there a difference? Do you have different recommendations for either of those?
Well, a lot of the flavored waters that we're seeing come out, like the bubbly, are flavored without any sugar, or even without a lot of artificial sweeteners. So they don't have a lot of calories in it. I don't even know really, honestly, how they make the flavor in them. And we don't, because they're so new, we don't have a lot of data on them. But my guess, based on what I know is in those drinks, is that if you're somebody who likes a carbonated drink, and you don't want to drink specifically like plain seltzer water or anything like that, that those drinks are probably a pretty good bet, especially if you're somebody who drinks a lot of soda. So Coke or Mountain Dew or Orange Crush. If you're drinking one of those things and looking to keep the bubbly feeling, but lower the calories and try to find something that is better for you, I think those are going to be a great option. Just make sure that you look at these ingredients, and some of them are flavored with sugar, and so have a significant amount of calories. So just, put your glasses on if you need to, flip that can over and look to see what the calories are if they have added sugar.
Okay, so shifting away from just the food itself, when it comes to eating and cooking, there is one thing that I know a lot of people struggle with, myself included, is meal prep. So Della on Facebook asks, what is the best way to implement meal prepping as part of your renal diet?
So I am definitely not the poster child for meal prepping either. I have a lot of difficulty with that. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of pre-planning and a lot of discipline to get there, because all of us have busy lives, and it's often hard to think a couple days away to meal prep. But if you can get into a habit of meal prepping, it will absolutely change your life a couple of different ways, as far as making sure that you have healthy things to eat when lunch or dinner comes around during a busy week. So the way that I would look at meal prepping is if you take a Sunday and figure out a couple things that you're going to eat that can last you through lunches and dinners through multiple days in the week. So if you have if you're going to have salads, so cutting up vegetables on a Sunday, cutting up some carrots and some cucumber, and making sure your lettuce is washed and ready for you to easily use during the week. I think that's a good place to start. If you like grains, quinoa or couscous, those can be used in salads or on the side of a protein throughout the course of the week. So you could take a Sunday and make a large portion of those grains to use as the week goes on. And then looking at proteins. So most people like to have some kind of protein during their big meals, and if they can have something ready on Saturday, or on the weekend, one thing that I like to do is I'll take chicken breasts and just bake 3 to 4 chicken breasts on a Sunday. Just coat them with olive oil, put some of my favorite no sodium seasoning on it, and bake them at about 400 degrees for about 20 minutes in the oven. And then throughout the week, you've got a low sodium, unprocessed protein to use for things like salads, or to throw in pastas, or put on a sandwich. So that's kind of the way that I would approach meal planning. So think of ahead of time what you're going to eat during the meat, and then look at vegetables, protein, and a grain that you can use multiple times for different meals during the week.
So you're saying have an assortment of things, cook big on one day, and then throughout the week, you can kind of use those ingredients in different ways to create different things.
Exactly. So for example, I had earlier this week, I had a big thing of Brussels sprouts. And I don't know how you feel about Brussels sprouts, but this time of year, roasted Brussels sprouts, I've come to like them. And so if you roast a lot of Brussels sprouts or a lot of vegetables on one day, those are great mixed in with pasta on another day. So you can have a roasted vegetable pasta with some can of chickpeas or something like that. You can also use those roasted vegetables in a salad, because they will give the salad a nice kind of browned flavor, and really can help you up your salad game if you have a browned vegetable plus maybe a little bit of fruit and a tart dressing. So exactly what you said, making a big batch of an ingredient that you can use different ways through the week, I think is really helpful.
On that, I just wanted to ask you, we had just a quick question. You mentioned vinegars and different herbs, and we have a question. How is cooking with wine okay?
Yes, cooking with wine is great. There's no problem with your kidneys standpoint from cooking with wine. I use it in one of my bolognese recipes, my vegan bolognese recipe, just to give a well-rounded and deep flavor, some red wine. But using red or white wine in your cooking regimen is perfectly safe and healthy on your kidneys.
Okay. So here's a question, and I know many people struggle with this. This comes from Francis on Facebook. Asks, eating kidney-friendly is really expensive. What should I look for when shopping for kidney-friendly ingredients that aren't as expensive?
This is a tough one because it can get expensive to cook. And by kidney friendly, I'm thinking about fresh meats, fresh vegetables, things that you're cooking from scratch at home, because the things that are not that are pre-prepared often have a lot of sodium additives or phosphorus additives or potassium additives. And those are often really cheap, like in the frozen section at Walmart or something. So it's a great question. So the things that I would lean towards, depending on what your specific dietary problems are, like whether or not you have to avoid potassium, would be things like canned beans. So you can use canned chickpeas or canned black beans. Both are a little higher in potassium, but not everybody has a potassium restriction. Just make sure you get a no sodium version. Or if you end up getting a higher sodium version because they're cheaper, then you just have to soak them for a little bit of time to kind of let the salt dissipate from those ingredients. I don't think that the canned vegetables are often a good way to go, because those are really high sodium and often so highly processed that a lot of the nutritional value is out of them. But a big bag of frozen vegetables instead of fresh vegetables may save you some money. And then buying in bulk with fresh meats is helpful as well. So big bulk chicken breast or frozen salmon fillets that you buy in bulk and put in the freezer and can use. Those are ways that you may be able to trim some of the cost off. And then you're learning to season with cheap ingredients. So these things like having a full spice cabinet, which will cost you a bunch of money at the beginning for sure. But if you can make that investment up front in 10 to 15 spices, that will allow you to take relatively bland food and season it without a lot of extra cost as time goes on. So it's a tough thing sometimes, especially if you're used to foods that are either already processed or things that aren't containing a lot of sodium in them. But it takes practice and repetition.
So Dr. Shusterman, you brought up beans, and eating beans, that comes up a lot for us here at Kidney Fund. And so we actually have two questions about beans. See if I can combine them. Anita asks, I always thought you were supposed to stay away from beans. What do you do if you've been told to increase protein because of anemia? And another one relates to, I guess, can I eat beans on a vegan diet if I have gout at stage 3? Or it's anonymous, should you refrain from beans? So I guess there are two kind of questions. Should you stay away from beans in general because of anemia, and beans if you have gout stage 3?
Sure. So I think this gets to one of those misconceptions that I talked about at the beginning. And thank you so much for asking all these questions about beans, because beans are a great source of plant-based protein. They've got a lot of fiber in them. And beans are a great addition to your diet. But beans do tend to have sometimes higher phosphorus and sometimes higher potassium. And so when you get those diets online, or you talk to somebody who's not necessarily really well versed in the management of kidney disease and diet, they may tell you that you have to give up all beans, and no matter what stage of your kidney disease. But what I've found is that a lot of people with kidney disease can incorporate beans into their diet in a safe way. And this is really something that you should talk to your doctor, or what I recommend is that everybody who has kidney disease advocate to their physician to get them to a dietitian who can specifically analyze their blood potassium levels, their blood phosphorus levels, and give them more personalized recommendations about how to incorporate beans into their diet. And there's a difference between having a few beans on the side of your food versus having, 3-bean chili and having 4 bowls of it. So that will tremendously change whether or not it's safe for you and the amount of potassium and phosphorus in those dishes. So if you have a dietitian, talk to them. Most people can incorporate beans into a healthy kidney diet, but it should be individualized. If you have early stage kidney disease, stage 1, 2, or 3, it can be done almost certainly safely. But again, I'm not your doctor, so I'm not entirely sure. As far as gout goes, it depends on what your specific triggers are for gout. I also have a lot of people I see who have gout who can eat a vegan diet and incorporate beans into it without any problems. Red meat and shellfish and red wine are often things that trigger gout for them. So incorporating some beans can usually be done safely. If you have gout, it's sometimes, and this I know it doesn't sound great, but sometimes it's trial and error. People find out really quickly what is safe and what is not safe for them, because it will trigger gout. And if you have a gout attack, I've never had one, but for people who've had it, it's pretty miserable. So you'll pretty quickly learn whether or not you can tolerate a little bit of beans in those diets.
And for those reasons, and also everything that you're mentioning, I encourage our audience to check out your book and your website, because those are recipes and methods and techniques that are specifically for people who are living with kidney disease. Not all recipes have that. Also on our website, Kidney Kitchen, we have lots of different recipes that feature different ingredients. And so if you're a little bit bored with maybe what you've been eating and not sure what's something that you can cook that's new and a little bit more exciting, I think your resources, Dr. Shusterman, are fantastic, and also what we have on Kidney Kitchen that you've helped us develop. So please take a look at those. So I have another question here for you. This comes from Harley, and this is also something we get often. I know alcohol should be in moderation, but is one better than another one? So he says, my cousin swears whiskey is better than beer.
Now, when you say better, do you mean better tasting or better for your kidneys? That's the question. The alcohol in both drinks, for most people, is safe for people with kidney disease. If you have high blood pressure, alcohol can raise your blood pressure. So adding a couple drinks, can add somewhere between 3 and 10 millimeters of mercury to your high blood pressure. So you're typically 130, but you're having a few drinks, it can raise your systolic blood pressure to 135 or 140. So that's the issue where alcohol comes into play. But for the most part, there's no difference between any different types of alcohol, unless you're having a mixed alcoholic drink where it has a lot of potassium or a lot of phosphorus in it. That's not good for your other limitations with kidney disease. Red wine, beer, whiskey, rye, all those things will basically have the same effect on your kidneys.
Okay. Another question, and this has been in the news quite often that I've seen, is intermittent fasting good for your kidneys, or should we eat on a schedule due to sugar levels?
So the impact of intermittent fasting on the kidneys has not been studied well, as far as I know. There are people that have success with intermittent fasting as far as weight loss and feeling better. And people who are obese or have uncontrolled sugars do have a higher risk of developing kidney disease. So intermittent fasting, if that's something that can be maintained for a long time, may have a benefit if it can get weight down and take your sugars under control. I look at diets kind of I take a step back and look at them. So intermittent fasting, I personally know that if I got on intermittent fasting, it's not something that I could continue for the rest of my life. And I like a diet to be something that fits within my lifestyle and that it fits for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So we don't have any specific data about intermittent fasting and its effects on the kidneys. I think it'd be really interesting to study, and I'm hopeful that somebody does study it. But with kidney disease, there's no benefit to having definitely a specific set eating schedule. So from that standpoint, it wouldn't matter. Now, people with diabetes are a little bit different because a set eating schedule can sometimes prevent the sugars from dropping if you have too much insulin in your system. Mm-hmm. But it's a great question about intermittent fasting, and I hope somebody does a study and figures it out.
So we have a couple of questions that have come in related to grains. So what are your thoughts on whole grains and pastas for living with kidney disease? And there was another question that I saw come in about grains. Just a moment. Yes. What are the healthiest grains to cook and the healthiest vegetables?
So grains are another one often where if you look at the generic diets for kidney disease online, you'll see that whole grains are asked to be limited. So they tell you to eat white rice and avoid brown rice or whole grain pastas and things like that. But the more we learn about the way the body processes these whole grains, the more we're learning that for almost everybody with kidney disease, incorporating these whole grains into your diet probably has some benefit, because it allows you to get that extra fiber that comes in those whole grains, and allows you also the extra minerals that comes in those whole grains. So I am a believer that whole grains can be fit into any kidney healthy diet. Now, as far as the healthiest whole grains, I don't know that there's one healthier than another. But incorporating whole grain pasta or whole grain couscous or quinoa into your diet, I think is a great option. So you don't have to be perfect with them. And this is what I think sometimes we get lost is that people say, well, I can't have whole grain foods, or I can just have non-whole grain foods. We want to find a diet that works for you and that you can come home and cook with and enjoy with your family, and something that is hopefully not too restrictive for everybody. So I look at the whole grains from that standpoint. I think they're pretty safe for most people with kidney disease to incorporate into their diet. The non-whole grains for people who have diabetes can sometimes run the sugar up, things like regular pastas. So you have to limit those somewhat. And then the last part of your question was the healthiest vegetable. Boy, that's tough. All vegetables, the more vegetables, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I would choose your vegetable based on whether or not you have a strict potassium limit with your diet. But I love a lot of vegetables.
All right. So I want to read this to you. This comes from Lorraine. Dr. Shusterman's book is great. 2 exclamation marks. It is so worth the money, so much valuable information and recipes. I did purchase one for a Christmas present for my friend. So Lorraine, thank you for that. Thank you. And I think it really does speak to what you've been talking about today, that you have in your book and on your videos, ways that people can live with having kidney disease, eating well, but also enjoying the food. And I think that that's something that we try to get across to people. But I have a question following up on that, Dr. Shusterman. Everybody isn't really happy about cooking. A lot of people don't like it, or they feel intimidated, or just don't know where to begin. So if someone has kidney disease, or they cook for people, or someone who has kidney disease, and they're not really all that comfortable cooking, or just haven't done it, how do you recommend someone get started? What are some things that they can do just to start cooking?
I do hear this from a lot of people, often sometimes from people who are single, or people who have lost a loved one who used to cook for them, and they're trying to figure out how to learn to cook. Because whether it is something that you don't like to do, or maybe you don't have a lot of room in your kitchen, or you don't have the latest appliances or sharpest knives. So there are a lot of barriers sometimes for people starting out to cook. The way I tell people to approach it is, first of all, if there is any kind of basic cooking class in your area, the culinary institutes often have them. Start there and take a short class there. I know in Greenville, we've got a number of places people can do it. Buy a basic cooking book. What was the one that How to Cook Everything is a nice book to start with. That kind of goes through a lot of the basics of just kind of baking chicken, or roasting chicken, or cutting up vegetables. Learning the different types of cooking, whether it's sauteing or baking. So something really simple to start with. And then over time, with practice, things will get better. And you have to understand that your cooking is probably going to produce some really terrible food at the beginning. But that's something that we deal with every day. Even people like me who cook all the time, some of my meals are just terrible, and it's all part of the learning process. So start simply. If you don't have an oven at home, sometimes you can get a toaster oven, a bigger toaster oven to start with, where you learn to bake some things, or cook on the stove. Or even if you don't have pots and pans that are good, it doesn't take much. Just some inexpensive non-stick pans are a great place to start. You don't need fancy equipment to learn to cook. Start simply. Buy one of these books that are just a generic learn to cook book, and see how it goes.
I think that's great advice. Start with what you have and start small and try to go from there. There's a question about dairy. Are dairy products problematic for your kidneys?